Hey everyone, welcome to Read and Recap. Today we've got something exciting lined up for you. Today we will summarize Volume 1 of Pride and Prejudice, the novel by Jane Austen. This would be a 3-volume series with each volume summarized in one video. This video will summarize Volume 1. So grab a seat, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and let's dive right in.
Summary of Volume 1 of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Pride and Prejudice is a novel that explores the manners, upbringing, morality, education, and marriage in the society of the landed gentry of early 19th century England. Volume 1 of the novel introduces the central characters, setting the stage for the unfolding drama and highlighting the primary themes of pride, prejudice, social class, and the complexity of human relationships. Chapter 1, The Bennet Family. The novel begins with one of the most famous lines in English literature. It is a truth universally acknowledged, that a single man in possession of a good fortune, must be in want of a wife. This statement underscores the primary concern of Mrs. Bennet, the mother of 5 unmarried daughters. Her primary aim is to secure advantageous marriages for her daughters. The Bennet family lives in Longbourn, a modest estate in Hertfordshire. Mr. Bennet is a gentleman with a sarcastic wit, often indulging in dry humor at the expense of his wife and daughters. Mrs. Bennet, on the other hand, is a frivolous and somewhat foolish woman, obsessed with marrying off her daughters. The Bennet daughters, in order of age, are Jane, Elizabeth, Lizzie, Mary, Catherine, Kitty, and Lydia. News arrives that a wealthy young man, Mr. Charles Bingley, has rented Netherfield Park, a nearby estate. Mrs. Bennet is eager to introduce her daughters to him, hoping one of them might catch his eye. Chapter 2, A Visit to Mr. Bingley. Mr. Bennet surprises his wife and daughters by visiting Mr. Bingley at Netherfield, which delights Mrs. Bennet. This visit paves the way for future social interactions between the Bennet family and Mr. Bingley. The Bennet women eagerly anticipate the upcoming ball at Meryton, where they hope to meet Mr. Bingley. Chapter 3, The Meryton Ball. The Meryton Ball marks the first significant social event in the novel. Mr. Bingley attends with his sisters, Caroline and Louisa, as well as his friend, Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy, and Mr. Darcy's cousin, Colonel Fitzwilliam. Mr. Bingley is immediately attracted to Jane Bennet, the eldest Bennet daughter, and dances with her twice, which is a clear sign of his interest. Mr. Darcy, however, is less sociable and refuses to dance with Elizabeth Bennet, describing her as tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me. This comment is overheard by Elizabeth, who develops a strong dislike for Darcy. Darcy's pride and aloofness make him unpopular with the other guests, while Mr. Bingley's amiable nature endears him to everyone. Chapter 4, Jane and Bingley's Mutual Attraction. In the days following the ball, Jane and Elizabeth discuss their impressions of Mr. Bingley and Mr. Darcy. Jane is taken with Mr. Bingley's good nature and affability, while Elizabeth is more skeptical, particularly of Mr. Darcy's haughty demeanor. Jane, ever the optimist, tries to see the good in everyone, while Elizabeth is more critical. The relationship between Jane and Mr. Bingley begins to blossom, with Bingley frequently visiting the Bennet household and showing clear signs of affection for Jane. The Bingley sisters, however, are less pleased with this developing relationship, feeling that Jane's social status is beneath their brothers. Chapter 5, The Lucas Family. The Lucas family, who are neighbors to the Bennets, are introduced in this chapter. Sir William Lucas, who was once a tradesman but was knighted, and his wife, Lady Lucas, are friendly with the Bennets. Their eldest daughter, Charlotte Lucas, is Elizabeth's close friend. The Lucases discuss the recent ball, and Charlotte suggests that Mr. Darcy's refusal to dance with Elizabeth might indicate that he is shy. Elizabeth, however, remains convinced that Darcy is simply arrogant. Chapter 6, Growing Affections. As Mr. Bingley's interest in Jane deepens, the Bennet family is hopeful for an engagement. Jane is invited to dine at Netherfield, but she catches a cold on the way and ends up staying there for several days to recover. Elizabeth visits her sister, spending time with Mr. Bingley and Mr. Darcy. During this time, Darcy begins to take notice of Elizabeth's intelligence and wit, despite her lower social standing. Elizabeth, however, remains unaware of Darcy's growing admiration and continues to view him with disdain. Meanwhile, Charlotte Lucas, ever pragmatic, advises Elizabeth not to dismiss Mr. Darcy entirely, as his wealth and status make him a desirable match, despite his personality. Chapter 7, The Arrival of Mr. Collins. The Bennet household is shaken up by the arrival of Mr. Collins, a pompous and obsequious clergyman who is also the Bennet family's heir due to the entailment of the Longbourn estate. Mr. Collins is a distant cousin, and because Mr. Bennet has no male heirs, Mr. Collins stands to inherit Longbourn upon Mr. Bennet's death. Mr. Collins's visit is driven by his desire to marry one of the Bennet daughters, thus keeping the estate within the family. He has already secured the favor of his wealthy patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, who has encouraged him to find a wife. Mr. Collins initially sets his sights on Jane, but when Mrs. Bennet informs him that Jane is likely to become engaged to Mr. Bingley, he shifts his attention to Elizabeth. Chapter 8: Elizabeth refuses Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins proposes to Elizabeth in a long, pompous speech, assuming that she will be eager to accept his offer due to the security it would provide. Elizabeth, however, is horrified by the prospect of marrying someone she does not love and who has such a repugnant personality. She firmly rejects Mr. Collins's proposal, much to his shock. Mrs. Bennet is furious with Elizabeth for refusing Mr. Collins, as she sees it as a missed opportunity to secure the family's future. Mr. Bennet, on the other hand, supports Elizabeth's decision, valuing her happiness over financial security. Chapter 9: The Bingley Sisters and Mr. Darcy. The Bingley sisters, particularly Caroline, continue to show disdain for the Bennet family, believing them to be socially inferior. Caroline Bingley is also determined to attract Mr. Darcy's attention, hoping to secure him for herself. However, Mr. Darcy's growing interest in Elizabeth becomes more apparent, although Elizabeth remains unaware of it. Meanwhile, Jane and Elizabeth's younger sisters, particularly Lydia and Kitty, are more concerned with flirting with the soldiers stationed in Meryton than with their social prospects. This behavior embarrasses Elizabeth, who is more concerned with propriety. Chapter 10: Mr. Wickham's Introduction. The arrival of Mr. George Wickham, a handsome and charming officer, introduces a new dynamic to the story. Wickham quickly gains Elizabeth's favor with his easy manner and good looks. During a conversation, Wickham reveals that he has a past connection with Mr. Darcy, claiming that Darcy wronged him by denying him a valuable living, a position as a clergyman, that was left to him by Darcy's late father. Wickham's story paints Darcy in an even more negative light in Elizabeth's eyes, deepening her dislike for him. Chapter 11: The Netherfield Ball. The Netherfield Ball is a significant event, as it brings together all the main characters and further develops the relationships between them. Mr. Darcy surprises Elizabeth by asking her to dance, and she reluctantly agrees. Their dance is awkward, filled with tension, and marked by sharp exchanges. Elizabeth's prejudice against Darcy is heightened by Wickham's story, and she believes Darcy to be a man of poor character. At the same time, Mr. Collins makes a fool of himself by dancing poorly and attempting to ingratiate himself with the Bingley sisters and Mr. Darcy, much to Elizabeth's embarrassment. The evening ends on a sour note, with Elizabeth feeling more resolved in her negative opinion of Darcy. Chapter 12: Mr. Collins proposes again. After the Netherfield Ball, Mr. Collins renews his proposal to Elizabeth, this time more insistently. He argues that it is her duty to marry him for the sake of her family. Elizabeth, however, remains firm in her refusal, despite pressure from her mother. Mr. Collins is eventually forced to accept her rejection, although he does so with considerable indignation. Chapter 13: Charlotte accepts Mr. Collins. Shortly after Elizabeth's refusal, Mr. Collins proposes to Charlotte Lucas, who, despite her lack of affection for him, accepts. Charlotte is practical and sees marriage to Mr. Collins as a way to secure her future, even if it means marrying a man she does not love. Elizabeth is shocked and saddened by her friend's decision, but Charlotte explains that, at her age, she cannot afford to be too choosy. Chapter 14: Jane's Disappointment. Mr. Bingley abruptly leaves Netherfield and returns to London, leaving Jane heartbroken. Caroline Bingley writes to Jane, suggesting that Bingley has no intention of returning and hinting that he is likely to marry Mr. Darcy's sister, Georgiana. Elizabeth suspects that the Bingley sisters and Mr. Darcy have conspired to separate Jane and Bingley because they do not consider the Bennet family to be good enough for him. Jane travels to London to stay with her aunt and uncle, the Gardiners, hoping to see Mr. Bingley again. However, her stay in London is disappointing, as Bingley does not visit her, reinforcing Elizabeth's belief that he has been manipulated by his sisters and Darcy. Chapter 15: Elizabeth's Reflections. As the first volume comes to a close, Elizabeth reflects on the events that have transpired. She is concerned about Jane's unhappiness and is increasingly convinced that Mr. Darcy is responsible for it. Elizabeth's prejudice against Darcy deepens, while her admiration for Mr. Wickham grows. Elizabeth also contemplates Charlotte's marriage to Mr. Collins. She struggles to understand how her friend could marry a man so lacking in sense and grace, but she respects Charlotte's decision and resolves to visit her in her new home. Themes and character development in Volume 1. 1. Pride and Prejudice, the title of the novel reflects the primary themes of the story. Darcy's pride and Elizabeth's prejudice are central to the misunderstandings and conflicts that arise between them. Darcy's initial arrogance and Elizabeth's quick judgment of his character set the stage for the tension between them. 2. Social class and marriage. The novel explores the role of social class in relationships and marriage. The Bennet family's lower social standing and lack of wealth are significant obstacles in their interactions with wealthier families like the Bingleys and the Darcys. The entailment of the Bennet estate, which prevents the daughters from inheriting, also highlights the precariousness of their situation and the importance of securing advantageous marriages. 3. The complexity of human relationships. Austen presents a nuanced view of relationships, showing that they are often influenced by external factors such as social expectations, financial considerations, and personal biases. The developing relationships between Jane and Bingley, Elizabeth and Darcy, and Charlotte and Mr. Collins all illustrate different aspects of love, friendship, and marriage. 4. Characterization. Austen's skillful characterization is evident in the first volume. Elizabeth Bennet emerges as a strong, intelligent, and independent-minded heroine who values love and respect over financial security. Mr. Darcy is initially portrayed as proud and aloof, but hints of his deeper feelings for Elizabeth begin to surface. Jane Bennet's gentle and trusting nature contrasts with Elizabeth's more critical outlook, while Mr. Collins's absurdity provides comic relief. 5. Satire and social commentary. Austen uses satire to critique the societal norms of her time, particularly the emphasis on marriage as a means of securing social status and financial stability. Mrs. Bennet's obsession with marrying off her daughters, Mr. Collins's obsequiousness, and Lady Catherine de Bourgh's arrogance are all targets of Austen's satire. Conclusion. Volume 1 of Pride and Prejudice sets the stage for the central conflicts and themes of the novel. It introduces the primary characters and relationships, highlighting the social pressures and personal prejudices that shape their actions. As the characters navigate the complexities of love, marriage, and social status, their true natures begin to emerge, setting the stage for the unfolding drama in the subsequent volumes. Elizabeth Bennet's journey, in particular, is one of self-discovery, as she learns to recognize and overcome her own prejudices while also challenging the pride of those around her. The interactions between Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy, in particular, drive the narrative forward, as their initially antagonistic relationship gradually evolves into one of mutual respect and understanding.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more awesome content. And to make sure you never miss an upload, tap the notification bell so you're always the first to know when new videos drop. Stay tuned for Volume 2. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.